Hello, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining the WildChina on-air events. This is our 63rd event since the pandemic started last year. Right? My name is Zhang Mei, and I'm the founder of WildChina. And today's event, we're extremely honored to be partnering with Roots and Shoots, an NGO that's founded by Dr. Jane Goodall, whom you already see on the screen. Roots and Shoots, welcome, Dr. Jane Goodall. Roots and Shoots works to empower today's youth to get involved in local communities and inspires sustainable travel and conservation involvement worldwide. This is a mission that is very much aligned with what WildChina is about. We work hard to provide sustainable travel opportunities for all types of travelers, youths, adults, students, business people. We also believe very much in conservation. Therefore, we're so excited to kickstart our 2021 Conservation Awareness Series with this event. Now, I will introduce our speakers. I think Dr. Jane Goodall needs no introduction. What an honor. She's our guest of honor today, and I'm sure many of you have read her books, listened to her talks, and many of us grew up with Dr. Jane Goodall as an inspiration in our lives. Right? She's famous for her work with the chimpanzees. She pioneered the path to redefining species conservation to include the needs of local people and the environment. And she continues to this day, every day probably, with her work to encourage involvement in conservation with organizations like Roots and Shoots and the Jane Goodall Institute. So, and I think one definition is that's missing, not definition, is she is a prolific writer and a great speaker. Her list of books is so long, and her list of children's books are inspiring our next generation. So welcome, Dr. Jane Goodall. We're very excited to have you with us today. And I'd like to introduce our two other panelists and longtime friends of WildChina and longtime friends of me personally. You'll see Dr. Long Yongcheng is dialing in from Yunnan, China. Dr. Long is China's most famous primatologist and researcher on Yunnan snub-nosed monkeys, right? He was the very first person on June 4th, 1992, after years of tracking snub-nosed monkeys over thousands of kilometers in the snowy mountains, deep forests, and became the first person to capture a photo of snub-nosed monkeys in the wild. He has devoted his entire life, decades of research and studying and protecting these unique wildlife. And currently, Dr. Long sits as the honorary chairman for the Chinese Primate Society. And my dear friend, Dr. Craig Kirkpatrick, who actually graduated with his PhD from UC Davis, not far from where I am now. Right? He worked with the Nature Conservancy, WWF, and now USAID. As a leading voice in biodiversity conservation and combating wildlife crime. His expertise on primates in China yields from his 10 years of studying in the Eastern Himalayas. So Dr. Kirkpatrick spent time both in Yunnan studying Yunnan snub-nosed monkeys, as well as in Sichuan, those golden monkeys there. And you'll tell us more about it, I'm sure. And so please join me in welcoming and thanking Dr. Jane Goodall, Dr. Kirkpatrick, and Dr. Long Yongcheng for joining us today. Now, just a word on logistics. I will hand over the floor to the speakers shortly, and Dr. Jane Goodall will give us about 10-15 minutes talk about her work. And we'll hear from Dr. Long and Dr. Kirkpatrick independently for another couple of minutes. Then we will start the conversation in the second half of today's event. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand things over to you, Dr. Jane Goodall, to start us off. Thank you again for taking the time and joining us from the UK. You are unmuted.
here we are. Now you can hear me now, I think.
Perfect.
Good. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm very delighted and honored that you invited me to speak at this conference and to join my fellow panelists.
Oh, I can speak French now.
And I want to also thank the Jane Goodall Institute, everyone who's helped to make the work in China carry on all these years. It began in 1994. But let me start when I was a little girl. I was born loving animals. I was very lucky in having a supportive mother who supported my love of animals and helped me find books to read about them. Back then, there was no television when I was growing up. In 2 weeks, I'll be 87, so I've lived longer than any of you, much longer. Anyway, I had a dream when I was 10 years old, and I read books about Tarzan and Africa. I will grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals and write books about them. No thought of being a scientist. Girls weren't scientists in those days, absolutely not. Everybody laughed at me. How would you do that? You don't have money. Africa's far away. And you're just a girl. I was right here where I'm speaking to you from now, the home in Bournemouth where I grew up. But I have this wonderful mother. She's behind me somewhere. Oh, she should be. I don't think she is now. But anyway, she, instead of laughing at me, said, Jane, if you really want to do this, then you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity and don't give up. Then you might find a way. That's the message I've taken all around the world, especially to children in disadvantaged communities. I've spread it around China. So many people have said, Jane, I want to thank you because you taught me. Because you did it, I can do it too. I wish Mum was alive to know how far her message has spread, how many lives it's changed. Anyway, I did get to Africa. I saved up money. Actually worked as a waitress in a hotel to get the money. Fortunate enough to meet the great paleontologist, Louis Leakey. And amazingly, I think he realized I was passionate. He was impressed by how much I knew, even though I'd only just arrived in Africa, because I'd read everything I could. And he gave me this amazing opportunity to go and live with and learn from not any old animal, but the one most like us, the chimpanzee. Nobody had studied them in the wild. Very little was known about them in captivity. It was all new ground. And it was very exciting. Initially, they ran away. For about 4 months, I was worried. It wasn't much money. And I knew if I didn't see something exciting, there would be the end. But fortunately, I saw one chimpanzee whom I named David Greybeard. Here he is up there. And I saw him breaking off grass stems, using them to fish termites from their underground nests. It wouldn't be exciting if you saw it today. We know that many animals use tools. Back then, science believed only human beings used and made tools. So that was the breakthrough. That meant the National Geographic came in, said they would continue to fund the work, sent a photographer and wildlife filmmaker, Hugo van Lauwijk, to film the amazing behavior that gradually I was learning more and more about. How like us chimpanzees are, kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting one another, males competing for dominance, looking just like some human politicians as they swagger and try to look important, and long-term bonds between mothers and their offspring. Good mothers, like mine, supportive, and less good mothers. Offspring of the good mothers grow up to have a higher rank and to be better mothers. Unfortunately, like us, they have a dark, aggressive side. They're capable of war, violence, brutality, killing, but they also have loving, compassionate, and altruistic side to their nature. They're just like us. They show emotions like happiness, sadness, fear, despair. When I finally got to Cambridge University for my PhD, the professors tried to teach me. that I shouldn't have given the chimpanzees names. I should have numbered them. That was scientific. I could not talk about them having personality, mind, or emotion. That was unique to us. But I'd already been taught by my dog as a child that that wasn't true. So I had the courage of my conviction. I went on talking about the chimpanzees' emotions, their obvious personalities. And because of Hugo's film, eventually science began to change. And that's perhaps one of the most important things that came out of this study, with the help of the chimpanzees, who share 98.6% of DNA with us. Gradually, science has changed its reductionist way of thinking. And gradually, students now can study animal personality, study animal emotions, and study animal intelligence. And what we're learning is amazing. And it's beginning to pay off. It's beginning to help people understand how cruel we have been in our behavior, thinking animals were just things, thinking we could make use of them just as we wished, thinking it didn't matter because they were totally different from us, but they're not. And what's being found out now, especially about their intelligence, but also about their emotions, is really changing the way we think. I left my studies in Gombe with a research station. We just had our 60th anniversary. And I left in 1986, and when at a big conference, I realized that right across Africa, chimpanzee numbers were dropping. There were by then 6 other research sites, that forests were disappearing, and also some of the cruel conditions, for example, in medical research laboratories. I went to that conference as a scientist. I left as an activist. I had to try to do something. That's where, when I went around Africa trying to learn more about the plight of chimps, I realized also the plight of so many of the people living in and around chimp habitat, crippling poverty, lack of good health and education. And this is when it hit me. If we don't help people find ways of making a living without destroying the environment in their desperation to grow food, to feed their growing families, we haven't a hope of saving chimpanzees or their forests or anything else. And so I began our program Tukari, which is now in 6 other African countries. And in Tanzania, where I began, it's in all of the 104 villages throughout the chimp range in Tanzania. Well, this was all costing money. So I began traveling around the world, talking, raising awareness about what was happening to our precious environment, all the problems that we're inflicting on Mother Nature, our lack of respect for the natural world and the animals. And I was meeting young people who seemed to have lost hope. They were apathetic, didn't seem to care, or they were angry, or they were depressed. And I began talking to them. This is all around the world. Well, you've compromised our future, and there's nothing we can do about it. Well, we have compromised their future. We've been stealing it for a very, very long time, but it's not too late. That's when I began this Roots and Shoots program. Began with 12 students in Tanzania. It's now in 86 countries and growing. It has members in preschool, not many, but lots in kindergarten, many in universities and everything in between, and some young adults, and even in old people's homes as well. I brought it to China on my very first visit in 1994. And that was the time when the Chinese attitude towards protecting the environment was beginning to change. And at that time, I was writing a book about endangered species. And so on that first visit to China, and then again the following year, I met some of the people in China who were working on protecting endangered species and actually giving some of them a second chance of survival, rescuing them from the very brink of extinction. And so the first one that I met was the Milo the deer. And I went with Dr. Guo Geng to the Milo Deer Park just outside Beijing and saw these beautiful deer that I'd been writing about. And I also met people working with the golden pheasant and the panda, of course, the giant panda. And I met Yongmei Chi, who was working to save the crested ibis very successfully. My good friend, John Hare, who was trying to rescue and has been amazingly successful, the wild camel, not the domestic Bactrian camel has 2 humps. The wild camel has 2 humps, but it's not genetically related to the domestic Bactrian camel. They live in the Gobi Desert, and it's the most hostile place in the world. So John, with his team of Chinese and Mongolians, has done an amazing job there. And then most recently, with Professor Jinfeng Qi and his team at the, oh, this is such a long name, I never get it right, but the China Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development Foundation, working on various environmental programs, but particularly the pangolin. And I want to say that when this pandemic began, this COVID-19, China was very, very quick to ban the eating of wild animals in the wildlife markets. And that temporary ban, as far as I know, has become a permanent ban. And the trading of wild animals has been stopped. And there's still some problems over medicinal, the traditional Chinese medicinal medicine, traditional medicine, but that is changing too. Full marks to the Chinese government for this. And the bear bile has been a problem, but I think most people don't understand that China has developed a synthetic form of bear bile, which works really well. It's much, much cheaper. It's got a very long scientific name, but it's known as UDCA. Synthetic, doesn't harm anybody, nor does it carry the risk of starting another pandemic, because these pandemics start, these zoonotic diseases, when a virus or a bacteria jumps from an animal to a human. If it bonds with a human cell, it may create a new disease. Unfortunately for us, this particular COVID-19 has spread very, very rapidly around the world. It's disrupted lives and economies everywhere now, and we're still battling it. I've had one vaccination. I haven't had the other one yet. So I think the last thing I will say is that the Roots and Shoots group now, because it began in 1994, we have alumni, and some of them are taking the lead in environmental programs in China. And the young Chinese, I've seen such a change since I first came in 1994. The attitude towards saving the environment, the attitude towards animals, the first conviction for somebody abandoning a dog, their dog. That couldn't have happened in 1994. The understanding that animals like us are sentient beings. And so I hope to be able to continue working with China. At the moment it's virtual, but I've done quite a lot of virtual programs since the pandemic began. And I hope to be able to continue in this way for a very long time, as long as I live. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jane Goodall. That is positively inspiring. Thank you for sharing with us your story. Now let's head over to Dr. Long Yongcheng. You will tell us a little bit about your study of the primates in China.
Okay, I will try to use a little little talk with a presentation. So my talk, the main is the primates matter. I focus on the Yunnan snubby. Somebody said the Yunnan snub nose monkey, but I think that's too long. So I just Yunnan snubby. Focus on that for a long, long time. So you can see that's from top to left to right, and top to down, and then you can see that's the 3.5 decades. So that's the first time I show up for the monkey size. So that's in 1985. That's April 13th, I remember. So almost 1 month to go, and then that's 36 years. And then the second, that's with Craig Kirkpatrick joined me and in the Snow Mountain that for the Yunnan snubby study. That's also almost 3 decades ago. I met him first in 1989. At that time, I still remember he said, "Oh, it's so hard to walk, to hike in this mountain. Can you find me a better way?" But actually, I think no such a better way. But anyway, Craig, I would like to thank Craig Kirkpatrick for his contribution, because he's the first PhD student focused on the Vietnam snubby. And then I was, after more than 10 years later, I still worked in the field, and sometimes I work with the local people in the Snow Mountain to see the monkey. And even the last one, only a few years, 2 years ago, I retired quite some years already. But at that time, I still go to the mountain to see the monkeys when they deliver babies. And why I can focus on this monkey for such a long time, because you see, it looks very like a panda. And then if you just look the teeth, that's a very human. You see, when you just see open the mouth, if that's a female, and then you can never tell apart if that's the mouth is the humans or the Vienna snubbies. Exactly the same, I think, in the whole world. This is very unique. And then also, I always compare with my monkey with my person face. I think we actually, I think this looks very similar, even better, more similar than all the other primate species in the world. And you can see the monkey, the Vienna snubby, they can, just like a human, they can giggle. And then they also have the recreation. You can see these photos. You can see they can just play a soccer. They use the rock and the wood. This is not a train. Nobody trained them. They just they developed such sports by themselves. That's why now more and more people enjoy to see the monkey. Some people to the spots, to the field to see the monkey. Some people, they have no chance to go to the field. They just see the photo. They enjoy, especially kids. But of course, the adults seldom to enjoy those photos of the animals. I think the kids is the most important. And the last the photo that shows the Claudia McMurray, who used to be the Assistant Secretary of the Department of the U.S. when George Bush, of George Bush Sr. In the cabinet. And then now I should talk a little bit because I work as a service a chair for the China primatologist community for over 10 years, from 2003 to 2013. And now I still the honor chair for the China Primatology Society. So we at that time I began to care about all the primate species. And then recently, I just tried to publish one book about the world of primates in China. So this is about I just managed to figure out all the species. There's over 540 species with 753 as a taxa. And then if we look at the map of China, you will see with less than half of the China territory occupied with the primates, and then you can see the distribution about 45% of the total land. But actually, in this area, the more people live in this area. We are counting that over 1.3 billion people in that small area, 45%. But the GDP in that area is over 95%. So that's why the primates service is so much plays so much important role for ecological service for the ensure China's economic development. So today my little talk I just a key only I want to mention is it is two essence for the old Chinese saying 人不为己，天诛地灭. That means humans have to plan our own futures, otherwise we're doomed to death. So that's my talk. I hope we can save some time.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Dr. Long. The conservation itself is for our own good.
Yeah.
Right.
Last news I want to mention that this year is the Chinese Communist Party's 1 century ceremony. So they want to broadcast 40 stories in the party's history. Such a 1 century history of 40 guys, 40 story. And then this we put in the movie. So for each this is series, they call that ideology, edifying China. So this so my episode is done. Will be put in shots very soon. Yeah. Maybe 2 weeks to go. 2 weeks to go.
Fantastic. Keep us posted.
Okay.
We will share the.
Yeah, so that's more and more people recognize the primates conservation is so much important for the whole China. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Long. Let's head over to Dr. Kirkpatrick from Bangkok right now. Chandra, if you could exit sharing. Fantastic. Craig, you're muted. Perfect.
Image.
Can you guys hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
Perfect.
Image. Great.
So what I want to do is take us back to 1989, which is, as Dr. Long said, the time when we met. And we met when we were traveling out to Laojun Mountain to try to find the monkeys. We were there for 2 months, living in a log cabin, cooking over a campfire. And we never found the monkeys. We never saw them. And that's because hunting was so prevalent at that time. And the habitat destruction was at the foot of the mountain. And as Dr. Goodall had mentioned, as in Africa, the human relationship with nature was fractured. And so throughout the range of monkeys in Laojun Mountain and elsewhere in Yunnan where the monkeys lived, this was the case. The monkeys were becoming endangered because of hunting and because of habitat destruction. And I remember talking to our guide at Laojun Mountain. He was a very wise man, spoke 5 languages of the ethnic minorities in the area, knew all the plants on the mountain. And I asked him if he was going to teach this forest craft to his son. And he said, no, I would not do that. I want my son to go to the city because the forests are not our future.
Mhm.
But Professor Long and I are nothing if not hard-headed. So we continued with our research. And by 1992, we were up at Primates Nature Reserve. We had two fantastic assistants who had just joined the nature reserve, Zhongtai and Shaolin. We found the monkeys, we followed them for a year. We learned that they actually went further north than ever expected. And when the nature reserve was built, people hadn't really known where the monkeys went. And on the basis of the research that I and Dr. Long and Zhongtai and Shaolin did, the nature reserve boundaries were expanded. As Dr. Goodall mentioned, the early 1990s, 1994 was a time of great awakening of the environmental movement in China. Liang Tongji founded Friends of Nature in 1994. It was the first environmental organization in China. Tang Xiang, who was a lifelong conservationist, was inspiring a new generation with his green summer camp, taking Beijing college students out to the field. And in 1996, going to Bamishuishan and investigating the deforestation happening on the southern border. The young firebrand Lu Zhi was inspiring a nation with her research on pandas. And she later went on to found the Sanshui Conservation Center. And by the late 90s, Professor Long and I had joined forces once again and were working with the Nature Conservancy to design a portfolio of nature reserves in Northwest Yunnan that would cover all of the snub-nosed monkeys range in Yunnan, including Laojun Mountain. Shaolin had gone on to become the deputy director of the nature reserve, would later go on to become a director of a nature reserve. And Zhongtai returned to the Southwest Forestry College and later went to Bamishuishan to become the research director and work with local communities alongside conservation organizations like WWF and the Kaduri Farm and Botanic Garden in Hong Kong to help local people develop livelihoods, develop ways of living that did not damage the forest, but still allowed them to bring themselves out of poverty. So that was 20 years ago. Let's fast forward to today. Laojun Mountain is now a protected area on its own. The Nature Conservancy has continued its long work with local communities to make things better. And things are getting better. The hunting has stopped. The monkeys are no longer afraid of humans. There's an outdoor education center so local children can learn about the connection between nature and people. And the young people in the local communities are becoming rangers, they're becoming guards. They're going back into the forest because they realize that forests are the future. So this damaged relationship between nature and humans is being repaired. And this is happening throughout the range of the monkeys, where once we were fearful that the monkeys would become ever more endangered, the populations now seem stable. We're not out of the woods yet. There's still a lot of work to do, but there's cause for hope. And the reason I'm telling this story is to say that even when things look desperate, as they looked 30 years ago, as long as we continue to do the hard work, as long as we continue to be devoted to our mission, as long as we continue to inspire each other, we can affect positive change. And that's the story of conservation in China, and it's the story of primate conservation in China. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Craig. This is one of the most challenging stories to talk about wildlife conservation. And yet I love the messaging. It circles back to a story of hope. And now let's welcome back all the panelists. I saw Dr. Jane Goodall, I see her there. And let me kick off with a couple of questions. When we have, by the way, this looks like a early Nature Conservancy reunion. I see Ed Norton. I see Heather Peters, old friends from early 2000s are coming back to join us. Wonderful. Now, the first question, I don't mean to throw a wet blanket on this conservation challenges. I wonder, Dr. Goodall, with 6 decades, more than half a century's devotion to the chimpanzee conservation, in your view, are we better? Are we doing better than before? I read on your website, in 1900s, there were 1 million chimpanzees living in the wild, and today there are 340,000. That's about only a third left. What is your sense? Are we doing better?
We've created a great deal more awareness. We have many more protected areas, but the chimpanzee numbers are still dropping. And the trouble is, Africa, where they live, is divided into all these different countries. And the rules, the regulations, the laws in the different countries, the dedication to wildlife conservation is always changing as presidents change. And so we can't have an overall policy that affects all the different chimpanzee populations. However, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that we will be successful in preventing chimpanzees and bonobos, their close relatives, and gorillas. We shall prevent them from becoming extinct in Africa. And partly that's because this Roots and Shoots program that I mentioned is growing very fast in Africa. And it's divided into projects chosen by the young people to make the world a better place, to make it better for people. That's like our Dakari program, improving the lives of people so they no longer have to rely on destroying the forest to grow food or make charcoal, make things better for animals and make things better for the environment. So in China, the Roots and Shoots are doing an awful lot of work with planting trees, with recycling, with helping a growing understanding of exactly who animals are, young people going out to join conservation groups and to work in the forests. So are we doing better? We're doing a lot better as far as awareness is concerned. But in terms of chimpanzee numbers, and probably it was closer to 2 million, by the way, we're not doing better yet, but I think it's kind of stabilized at this point, I hope.
Okay, and a question from Ed Norton for Dr. Long and Craig. Is the population for U.S. numbers monkeys stable now? And have the populations at Laojunshan, Baimaxueshan remained stable, or has tourism affected the population?
I'll definitely leave that one to Dr. Long.
Okay, that's a good question. Actually, if we talk about the conservation, where especially wildlife conservation, what we need to do is to increase the population. You must not be when I did the first range-wide survey about the population. I think Craig and I published that paper. That's in 1994. So at that time, we just think the whole China, such a species population is only 1,500. But now we just do the third range-wide survey that shows almost 4,000. And with one population, I found that that's in 1987 in Weishi, used to be only 200, but now it's over 1,000 already, just one population, you see. And even right now, the Craig mentioned for the Laojun Mountain, at that time in 1989, it's so hard to see the monkey. We try very hard, cannot really see them clearly. And then even once, so only just we saw, and but Craig could not saw them, could not see them. But at that time, only 100, but now it's over 400 now in Laojing Mountain. So if you go to Laojing right now, it's certainly we don't need such a long time, maybe not just 2 months, but actually at that time it's more than 2 months. We could not really see them. But this time, maybe just 1 week, for sure, you can see the monkey. And the population is over 400 individuals. So range-wide, range-widely in 1985, when I first showed up in the Primates, at that time it was the Yunnan monkeys conservation reserve, only one in Primates. Also the size is only 1,900 square kilometers. But now it's just Yunnan Primates Nature Reserve become 2,800 square kilometers. All put together, all the other nature reserves together is almost 6,000 square kilometers of a primary forest. So that, I think that's a really good. We have a good achievements on the Yunnan Snappy conservation. That's why our story has been chosen for celebrating the Chinese Party's communist Chinese Communist Party centennial celebration.
Yeah,
thanks.
That's wonderful, Dr. Long. It sounds like China's snub-nosed monkey conservation is doing better. Now, I want to draw the two continents, or two areas in comparison. What are, Craig and Dr. Long, what are the biggest challenges to primates conservation in China and compared to Africa? This is, I would love to hear from Dr. Jane Goodall as well. What are the differences of challenges?
I think the poverty alleviation in China recently is, I think this is really make the many countryside have take a new look now. I think the conservation also benefits this is great the government's the projects. But I think a lot of the international organization, especially like the TNC, really focus on Yunnan snub-nosed monkey conservation for a long time. Since the Craig showed up here in about 2.5 century, more than 2 century, 2 decades ago. Yeah. Now TNC is still doing this Yunnan snubby conservation program. A few years when I work for the Yunnan program of the TNC at that time, I chaired the project for quite some time. Actually, I worked for TNC over 15 years, and just the same as I work for the Kunming Institute of Zoology, also 15 years. So I have 15 years. Yeah. So that's a. I think the international organization supports China's a lot of program. Just a very cutting edge methodology. The introduction here in China, and then more and more people recognize the dialogue between the local people and the conservation program in China is more and more important than used to be. So I still, every time I still promote, try to my best to promote such a dialogue, because local people, they know how to do that. And then we need their involvement.
No,
second.
Craig, what do you think? What are the differences or different challenges between the two areas of conservation?
Well, I wouldn't presume to deeply understand the conservation issues in Africa. I think in large part, the issues are quite similar, but the proportion or the emphasis on them is somewhat different. So for example, when new roads are developed, habitats are cut in two, and it's easier to access those forests and to hunt. I think one of the main differences is that, generally speaking, Asia has a much higher human density, and actually a lot of the problems have already gone through. So the entire eastern half of China was deforested and defoliated long ago. And we're now seeing that more in Africa. But I would be very interested to hear Dr. Goodall's thoughts.
Well, certainly I agree that poverty alleviation is one of the things, and it's beginning to happen across Africa. But, you know, I can't emphasize enough that this conservation in Africa isn't like conservation in China, in that it's different countries with different regulations, different rules, and different attitudes towards conservation. So it's not easy to have one regulation for everything. It's all these different countries that we need to work in. And there are different problems in different countries. There's a very major problem in Africa with corruption, which I think has been a problem in China too, but being stamped out. And in some countries in Africa, they're trying very hard to stamp out corruption. But for example, you have a World Heritage Site in one country, which means it's safe forever, right? But a certain president can say, oh, I don't care about that, I'll build a dam there, and there's nobody to stop him. It's happening in the Sulu. And the problem of the roads being made, yes, in different countries, roads are made, fragmenting the habitat, that's the same, exactly the same kind of thing. Many of those roads, by the way, are paid for by China in Africa. Many African countries, dams are built by China. And in fact, China is doing very much in Africa what British and European colonialism has been doing for years and is still doing to this day. And the big corporations, multinational corporations. And Africa is a kind of target now for other countries wanting to take their natural resources, their minerals, their timber. For Africa, that is a very huge problem. And the corruption of certain African governments doesn't help at all. And also the fact that many of them are very poor and they're lured by the promise of the building of infrastructure, which isn't always planned well and can damage wildlife. One major problem in Africa, which I have no idea about China, but I don't think it's the same at all, is the illegal wildlife trafficking. And so many species, animal and plant, are illegally taken out of Africa and shipped around. Some of it goes to the wildlife markets. Some of it goes to the growing wildlife pet trade. And that, again, is a major problem for Africa. Many African countries depend to a huge extent on tourism. And of course, the pandemic has limited or eliminated tourism, which has caused a lot of damage in national parks. There's no longer money to pay the rangers. The whole infrastructure of tourism, the guides, the rangers, the cooks, the people looking after them in the hotels has collapsed. And so you get poaching from desperate villagers who no longer have a job, but you also get it much easier for the international cartels to come in to take ivory and rhino horn. It was a huge benefit to us when China banned the importation of ivory from Africa. Unfortunately, a lot of that moved to countries around China in other parts of Asia. So that, you know, some of the same problems, but also different because Africa is not one country.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Very insightful. I think what I'm hearing from all three panelists is that despite all the differences, there's one key factor that will make a difference. It's us, the humans. A lot of the differences, both in China and Africa, are the humans. Now, because I'm very conscious of Dr. Jane Goodall's time, who needs to exit in the next 7 minutes, I'm going to devote the next 2 questions both to you, and there are so many questions, it's very difficult to choose from. One of them is, Dr. Goodall, your contribution to primates conservation is beyond description, and you inspired so many people. You've tried every conceivable approach to activism, film, speech, writing, community organization, roots and shoots sort of programs. Are there any approaches in particular that you think were particularly effective? And do you have any advice for a young person getting to get involved in China's activism in conservation today?
I think the advice to the young person, wherever they are, is that you've got to be really passionate about it because it's not easy. Funding isn't always easy to get. Sometimes the conditions are pretty primitive and it can be very difficult. And depending where you go, you know, the conditions may be really, really tough. And increasingly in Africa, you've got the threat of you know, coups and violence, and some of the places where we work, it's not safe at all, and we can't even have young people come anymore. But so you've got to be really passionate and know that that's what you want to do. And the first part of your question was
you tried so many different approaches.
And quite honestly, I think the world in general is in such an environmental state of it's pretty bad everywhere. And so we need every single approach. I can't do it all. My organization can't do it all. Collaboration, I think, is an absolute key here. Collaborate between different organizations, collaboration between different countries, certainly in Africa, but worldwide. If we don't get together around the world, then things are going to go from bad to worse because of climate change and because of loss of biodiversity. And what happens in one country, like Brazil, can affect the entire world. So China is playing a very major role in all of this. And a lot of what China does will affect conservation worldwide. And China has such a major position in the world today that to stand out in leadership to combat climate change will be such an amazingly important thing, which China is capable of doing. And the same with loss of biodiversity.
Absolutely. Now, a question submitted from the audience is, how were you able to generate a sufficient outside system to support your challenging mission and your NGO? Any advice on someone trying to do the same?
Well, it's been a long, hard fight, and it's been tough in different countries in different ways. And the only advice I have is, if you really care, to find other people who really care and involve them, and just have this you know, obstinate nature that says, I'm not going to give in. This is a good idea. I know it's helping. People tell me it's helping, so I won't give up. And, you know, just hope that somehow it will work out. And in every case so far, it has.
That's amazing. One of the issues that I've seen, even just us promoting this conference, this dialogue, immediately there are attacks on social media everywhere about, why do you care about wildlife more than humans? Or, you know, any activism in a direction that you care about naturally comes under attack, and I'm sure you've had no shortage of that. How do you deal with those challenging times?
Because it's absolutely not true. First of all, we have to remember we are animals. And secondly, at least half of everything we do is for people, because if we don't involve the local people, if we don't get the people of the country behind us, if we don't improve their lives so that they can be part of a growing population worldwide that's making ethical choices in what they buy, what they eat, what they wear, did it harm the environment? Was it cruel to animals? You know, we have to work with people in alleviating poverty, helping children, helping them in orphanages and so on. So it simply isn't true. I deal with them by saying, this is not true. We don't care more about animals than people. On the other hand, there are far more groups worldwide that are working to improve the lives of people than there are working to improve the lives of animals. So it's not a bad balance. We're doing both.
But just in general, when these vicious attacks come, how do you find your sort of North Star to emotionally stay tuned to truth and with conviction? It's very difficult with social media's attack coming so immediate and in massive quantities, particularly I'm sure for you as probably for a lot of people in conservation.
Well,
in techniques.
Well, our technique is, you know, if you get attacked on social media, give them an answer. Just be polite. If it's completely off the chart, ignore it if it's really stupid. But otherwise, just answer it and move on, and realize that now that we have opened ourselves to social media, we're going to get attacked. We're going to get crazy people. We're going to get people who just want to hear their own voices saying things that aren't true. And if we allow that to harm us within, then we cannot do our work. We cannot make a difference. So we just have to learn to deal with it and evaluate each single attack for what it's worth.
Amazing. Now, one sentence on your website that I found super inspiring is, she blazed the trail. The next steps are up to us. What are the 3 concrete things that you would suggest before you sign off to us all that we could take when we finish this meeting? 3 concrete things we could all do.
3 actual things we could all do. Well, I think one of them is to realize that every single day that we live, we make an impact on the planet. And so to think about, to make these small choices every day, as I've mentioned, what we eat, what we buy, what we wear, how was it made, and so on. That's one thing. Something which is gaining in importance, and I know it's true in China too, is the terrible effect that industrial agriculture of animals and crops too is having on the planet. And all the billions and billions of animals who are in intense factory farms. First, we have to remember they're all individuals, every single one of them, every single one. Pigs, for example, they are as intelligent or more intelligent than dogs. And I know a pig, she's called Picasso, not Picasso the artist, but Picasso. She loves painting. She was rescued on her way to slaughter. And her rescuer was an artist. Picasso takes the brush in her mouth and she goes up to the easel and she's so joyous and she paints these. They're selling for $5,000 now. And so all of these animals are individuals. Now they all have to be fed, billions of them. Huge areas of habitat are destroyed. Lots of fossil fuel is used to get the grain to the animals to the abattoir, the meat to the table. Water, getting increasingly scarce because of climate change in some parts of the world. Takes an awful lot of water to change vegetable to animal protein. And all of these animals, particularly cows, of course, are producing methane gas in their digestion, which is one of the very virulent greenhouse gases. Luckily, there's not as much of it as there is of carbon dioxide. So in all of these ways, eating less or no meat or going vegan, which I know is a growing trend in China, that is something important to do. And what's the other thing we could do? I don't know. I think the first one I said really covers pretty well everything.
Yes, thank you. Now I have to squeeze in one last question for my 12-year-old daughter who wants to know what your favorite animal is. And then we looked up, she found out it's a dog, not a chimpanzee. So the question is why?
Why is it a chimpanzee? Chimpanzees are so like people. I don't even think of them as animals. And just like people, there's some really nice chimpanzees like David Greybeard up there, and there's some really nasty ones like Frodo. So my favorite animal is a dog. And here's Rusty. Rusty was my companion throughout my youth. And when I got to Cambridge, and the professors of whom I was in awe, because, you know, I hadn't been to college, now I'm doing a PhD, and they tell me I've done everything wrong, and that animals don't have personalities, minds, or emotions. He taught me that wasn't true. He gave me the courage of my conviction. These professors in this, however learned they may be, they are completely wrong. And I think, quite honestly, I cannot believe that any of them who had any modicum of intelligence believed what they were saying. But as scientists, they couldn't prove it, not back then. Therefore, it didn't exist. And I was actually told by my wonderful supervisor that individuality in animals, maybe it existed, but it's best to push it under the carpet, because they couldn't prove it. But now we've proved that we can prove it. And it's just like testing medical research using animals. There are so many incredible alternatives now. I've just been learning all about them, the organ on a chip and the computer simulation and all of these other things. And the head of NIH in the US just said that he feels, having studied these alternatives, that they're safer for humans and they will save human lives and animal lives, and ultimately make animal research totally unnecessary and actually wrong. This is something else China could take a lead in. I mean, with China's brilliant aptitude for all of this technology, it's just up China's street. And I want to see the use of animals in medical testing and pharmaceutical testing, which China just banned, by the way. No testing on cosmetics coming in from outside if it's already been proven to be okay. So we move forward. We move forward in the world. We have new ideas. We need to share the ideas. We need to work together. We need to work together for a better world if we care at all about the future of our own great-great-grandchildren.
Thank you. Very inspiring words to end on, even though we are not able to get through all the questions. But I think we've all had this dosage of inspiration that we are able to go into the next day to do a little bit better for the world. Thank you so much, Dr. Jane Goodall.
Well,
And
you may send me questions on email if you like.
oh, there's a very long list. But thank you very much. And good luck with your shot tomorrow. And after COVID, we look forward to seeing you back in China again. And thank you for your lifetime contribution to all the great work for the planet.
And by the way, my second to last traveling before I was grounded by the pandemic was to China.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I was in China in December.
Oh, wow. Yeah, then it will have to be the next first trip post-COVID.
Right.
Can't wait. And
Okay, bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. If all of you want to hang on for just a second, I will talk a little bit about what's coming up next. And Craig, thank you, Craig. Thank you, Dr. Long. We hope to bring you back and have an in-depth conversation. Thank you, Dr. Jane Goodall.
Okay, bye.
Yeah, bye. So for some of us, I will talk a little bit about upcoming events. We have a whole series of conservation talks on conservation sustainability in China coming up. Stay tuned, wildchina.com. And a hint, the next one is going to be hopefully about rivers and national parks. And end of March, our March book club will be reading AI Superpowers chatting with the author Kai-Fu Lee, and many of us in China know Li Kai-Fu 老师会来跟我们谈他的书. So I look forward to seeing you all, and if you all have a chance, please support the work of Roots and Shoots and donate on their website. We can all do a little bit of our share to make the planet better. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Dr. Long. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Roots and Shoots, our partners. See you next time.